Your father left for work before the sun came up. Your mother packed lunches at a kitchen counter that still had last night's dishes on it. And somehow, at the end of every month, the bills got paid. Not easily, not without sacrifice, but they got paid. That was working class America in the 1980s. And if you lived it, there is nothing quite like stepping back into it. This was a decade that tested the working class in ways that still echo today. The factories were closing. The unions were weakening. Ronald Reagan was in the White House telling Americans that prosperity was just around the corner. For some, it was. For millions of others, the 1980s meant punching a time clock, stretching a dollar until it nearly tore, and holding on to the belief that a decent life was worth the effort it cost. Let's walk through what that life actually looked like. The neighborhoods, the kitchens, the jobs, the weekends. Some of this might feel familiar. Some of it might bring something back you had nearly forgotten. Let's step into that world. Working-class neighborhoods in the 1980s had a look and feel that was entirely their own. The houses were small and practical. Cape Cods and ranch homes had aluminum siding that needed painting, and gutters that were always one bad storm away from falling off. The yards were modest but tended. People took pride in what they had, even if what they had was not much. Front porches had metal lawn chairs. Driveways had pickup trucks or American-made sedans with a little rust beginning to show along the wheel wells. Neighbors knew each other by name and by schedule. You knew when the Kowalski family got home from their shift because you could hear their screen door slam every evening at 5:15. Inside those homes, the furniture was built to last, not to impress. Plaid couches from Sears and laminate countertops anchored the kitchen. A breakfast nook was where the family ate most of their meals because the dining room table was only set on Sundays and holidays. The kitchen smelled of coffee that had been sitting on the burner a few hours too long, and there was always something in the slow cooker. The television was the centerpiece of the living room. By the early 1980s, many working-class families were getting cable for the first time. HBO felt like a luxury. MTV launched in 1981, and the kids in the house could not get enough of it, while their parents wondered what on earth they were watching. Work was the rhythm that everything else moved to. The steel mills, the auto plants, the textile factories, the warehouses. Working-class Americans built things, moved things, fixed things, and drove things. Shifts started at 6 in the morning or at midnight. Overtime meant extra money and extra exhaustion. Union membership was still significant in the early part of the decade, though that would change. The air inside a factory in the 1980s was something you got used to or you did not. Grease and metal shavings on the floor. The constant noise of machinery was so loud you would be hearing it hours after you clocked out. Men and women who had worked the same line for 20 years, knowing every sound that machine made and what each sound meant. That knowledge was worth something. It was skill that could not be learned in a classroom. But the decade brought a wave of plant closures that devastated working-class communities. The Rust Belt took its name from this era: Pittsburgh, Detroit, Youngstown, Cleveland. Cities built on steel and manufacturing watched the industry contract in ways that seemed unthinkable just a decade before. Foreign competition, automation, and shifting corporate priorities sent jobs overseas or simply eliminated them. When a plant closed in a working-class town, it did not just take the jobs. It took the tax base that funded the schools. It took the customers from the diner on Main Street and the hardware store around the corner. It took something harder to name, something like the sense that if you worked hard enough, things would be all right. The 1980s put that belief under enormous pressure. Before we continue with the daily life, the food, and the culture that held working-class America together, if you are enjoying this look back at how regular Americans really lived, and you want to explore more chapters of American history, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about the people who built this country one paycheck at a time. Feeding a working-class family in the 1980s was an act of creativity and discipline. The grocery store required a plan. Coupons were clipped from the Sunday paper and organized carefully. Store-brand products lined the shelves of these kitchens because they stretched the money further. Name brands were for special occasions or when something was on sale. Dinners were hearty and made from scratch because it was cheaper that way. There might be pot roast on Sunday that became sandwiches on Monday. Spaghetti with meat sauce fed 6 people for a few dollars. Tuna casserole, hamburger helper. Chicken was bought whole and broken down at home because the butcher's pre-cut packages cost more. These were not gourmet meals, they were good meals. They were made with intention, and they were eaten together at a table where everyone sat at the same time. Fast food was a treat, not a habit. McDonald's on a Friday night after payday was something the kids would look forward to all week. The dollar menu made it accessible, and for a working-class family counting change, accessible mattered. But the household budget did not allow eating fast food several times a week. Clothing in working-class homes was practical and durable. Work boots were bought once and resold when the sole wore through. Jeans were washed until they faded to a gray blue. Kids wore hand-me-downs without a second thought because that was just how things worked. The big fashion trends of the 1980s, the designer labels, the Jordache jeans, the members-only jackets, existed in a world that working-class families watched from a distance, occasionally stepping into when something went on clearance. Back-to-school shopping happened once a year, and the list was deliberate. You bought what you needed. Sneakers were from Kmart or Payless, not from the mall's athletic store, and those sneakers were expected to last the year. The weekend was when working-class America exhaled. Saturday and Sunday were short, but they were yours. For many men, weekend time often meant working on the car in the driveway, because taking a car to a mechanic cost money that could stay in the household if you knew how to do it yourself. Oil changes, brake pads, belts, hoses, skills passed down from fathers to sons and sometimes daughters. A garage with a good set of tools was something to be proud of. Socializing happened in living rooms and backyards, not restaurants. People came over. Beer was bought by the case, not by the bottle. Card games ran late into the night. Conversations about the plant, about the union contract coming up for renegotiation, about who was hiring and who was laying off, filled the kitchen while the kids played in the basement. Sports were religion. Not watching sports in some luxury box, but actually watching, deeply and personally. Monday Night Football in the fall. The World Series. Local teams represented something about identity and place. When the Pittsburgh Steelers won or lost, the whole neighborhood felt it. Bowling leagues were social institutions in working-class communities. Tuesday nights at the lanes, team shirts with names on the back, competitions that had been going on for years between the same families. These were not just hobbies, they were the social fabric. Children in working-class households in the 1980s grew up understanding, usually without being told directly, that money required thought. They learned which cereals were not on the list. They learned that asking for the expensive toy in the aisle was not how things worked. But they also grew up in neighborhoods where kids were outside from morning to dusk, where every street had enough children to fill a baseball diamond, where summer was long and largely unsupervised and better for it. The 1980s were a complicated decade for working-class America. The economy recovered from the early recession by the mid-decade, but the recovery was not evenly shared. Corporate profits rose while wages stalled. The gap between the wealthy and the working class began widening in ways that would define American life for decades. Those who worked in industries that survived restructuring found themselves working harder for wages that bought less than they once had. And yet working-class communities held together with something remarkable, a culture of mutual support that rarely made the news but was the real story of the decade. Neighbors who watched each other's children, families who appeared at the door with a hot dish when someone got sick or lost a job, churches and union halls that served as community centers, a pride in honest work that was independent of what that work paid. What defined working-class life in America in the 1980s was dignity in the effort. The willingness to get up early and stay late, to make the most of what the week provided, and to build something real for the people who counted on you. It was not glamorous. It was not what was being sold in commercials or celebrated in movies. But it was the foundation everything else stood on. For those who lived it, the lunch pails and time clocks, the stretched budgets and simple weekends, those memories carry a weight that is hard to describe. It was life at its most honest. And for those who want to keep exploring these stories of how real Americans lived, there is always more history to uncover.